Hey, this is Robert here at Goozy Fabrication. Hit that like and subscribe. Now, this is the type of work that we're going to be doing today. Really nice, clean metal work. Because we want a really nice, clean finish out on our projects. Now, this channel is geared towards my DIY guys and gals working at home on your own projects. I want to give you some professional tips and tricks and walk you through all of the steps on how to replace a quarter panel correctly. Now what I'm doing here is laying out some rough cut lines. And what is a rough cut line? Okay, so we're going to be replacing this quarter panel, but we don't want to cut too close to the flange or the attachment points. If we do that, we could go through the attachment point or damage the attachment point. We want to open that panel up so that we can gain access and take care of the resistance welds, figure out how that panel is attached. Don't want to damage the flange. That's why we do a rough cut. And hey, anything that you see me doing here, you may not have the same tools at home, but you can do this. You can always substitute the tools that I'm using for something else. And worst comes to worst, hey man, grow your tool set. Okay, we're revealing the resistance welds on this quarter panel flange to wheelhouse so that we know where to cut. Now the wheelhouse is directly behind this. We don't want to cut into that. So somebody's done some really bad work. They've put this entire rear clip on. Oh yeah, here we go. That's a little bit of it. They've installed this entire rear clip on the 68 Charger, and they've used panel bond and a lot of body filler. Okay, here's the tip. Cut the bottom and all around the quarter panel. Leave a little bit attached. Cut that last so you can control the quarter panel when you remove it. We don't want it falling off on us. And that is called panel bond. Okay, panel bond is not intended to glue metal to metal. Anybody who says that it is, they don't know what they're talking about. You will have cohesive failure. Just like that. Imagine if that car was in an accident. Okay, let's see how deep the body filler goes. You can see quite a bit of build of body filler. And I guess that white under it might be panel bond. And you can see the cracking and more filler there. So somebody actually put this whole back half of this car onto this car at one time and just did it improperly. So, I mean, you can see here, obviously those are rust holes that somebody had panel bonded a patch on from behind on the sail panel. And that's a replacement lower quarter piece. And I have no idea how it's been affixed, but you can see a lot of panel bond there also. So here we go, straightening and prepping the door jamb area. And nice finish out. That's ready to go. And getting into the mating line on the sail panel. A lot of filler, and I stopped to kind of show you. I guess they had used JB Weld. I don't think that's approved, but JB Weld on that seam there. Not a great idea. Bad situation. Here we are just cleaning it out to expose the weld line. Then we're cutting right below that. Get rid of that old panel. And here we go. Just starting to scab off all of the panels. And no lack of panel bond. Now here's a special area. Okay, this flange. Yeah, this flange wasn't welded or panel bonded. Yeah, I don't really know what to say. And more filler. Now this is in the filler panel between the deck lid and the rear window. And you can see the quarter panel wasn't welded either. It was only panel bonded onto the wheel well lip. You definitely don't want to start a restoration over work like this. It's all got to come out, no question. Yeah, quite a mess getting all this stuff ground out, rock hard. And here's why you never panel bond metal. Panel bond does not adhere to metal. And it will always separate. Can't even imagine if this car was in a rear collision. And here we are removing more panel bond. A little time consuming. But there we've got it nice and feathered out. Here we go with some more massive amounts of body filler. And we're pretty much just repeating what we had shown you on the other side. Just going to speed it up here a little bit. Now they did weld in the door jambs, so we're separating all that and grinding that down, dressing it down, prepping it. Here I am removing the bottom of the quarter panel. Speed that up a little bit for you. Yeah, I have to say all of the inner parts, inner structures look really good on this car. There's some few minor spots that are going to have to be addressed that are rusted, but all in all, really, really nice start to a build. Too bad we have to come in and refinish a bunch of bad work. Installing the quarter panels on the Charger project, but before we do, we're going to be addressing an often overlooked area that should be always completed first, and that is rebuilding the door hinges. Okay, we have a lower hinge here, and I'm moving it, and you can see the play. Now what is causing that is the door hinge pin bushings, which are made out of brass, are worn, and that happens because of opening the car door multiple times over the years. It just causes those to wear out. So we're going to address that first. Oh, here's another really good shot of that. Yeah, you can see that little movement. That little movement there will translate into the door being very sloppy or dropping down when it's opened and shut. So we're going to drive this pin out. And get that out of there. And now we've disassembled the upper hinge. And now we're driving out the actual bushing itself. And these are brass, and if you overpower them, they will crack and chip off. So we want to try to dry those out as one unit. Yeah, here we go. Got it out. Okay, now this is the lower hinge, and you'll notice it does not have bushings. So what I'm showing you here is the wear mark. That's the shiny spot. Now if that is excessively worn, then we replace the hinge pin. And so now I've got these all nice and cleaned up, and I've used some epoxy paint here, and we're ready for assembly. So we're going to lay our shop rag in there. We don't want to scar up our newly primered parts. And now we're going to be installing the bushings themselves. And keeping in mind, like I had mentioned earlier, they are brass, and that's why I'm using a soft-faced hammer to seat those. We want to start those square and drive them in square. Otherwise, they are prone to break, and then we'd have to start the whole process all over again. So we've got our hinge pin going in, and we'll drive that down as far as possible. And you'll notice it has knurls. So that's going to require it being pressed into place. And a little trick I like to use is just sandwich a piece of aluminum in between the air hammer bit and the actual hinge pin head. And that's so that we don't damage it or scar it up really badly, chew it up. It just looks really unprofessional. So let's see what we've accomplished. Yeah, everything looks good. It's nice and tight now. And we're ready to go to the next step. So we're installing the upper hinge now. And we're just going to use light pressure to seat this thing. And I like using a 1/4 inch drive instead of a 3/8 or 1/2 inch. Or number one, for accessibility, and so that we don't have the tendency to over torque anything and stretch the threads, and that always leads to problems. And you can see here with this swivel, now this bolt is a little difficult to get to, but with the 1/4 inch, that gives me accessibility. Alright, here's another little tip for you. I work by myself a lot, so I thread this longer bolt in, and now I'm able to hold the door and then put a nut on instead of trying to fish a bolt into place and then try to screw it down. Just works a lot easier. And here we are aligning the top of the door. Just kind of rough alignment. And you can see we have a nice flush gap there. And once you set the top, then by default, wherever the gap falls between the rocker and the door, you know that's correct. And I'm putting this piece of tape up there just as a visual guide. And here's another really critical gap. The door is set correctly at the front and bottom if the bottom leading edge of the door and the front of the rocker edge are in alignment. Now you can see the gap. So if the top and the leading edge on the bottom are aligned, then your gap is perfect. And here we are installing the latch and striker. And when we disassemble, we always bag everything. And here's where that's going to come in really handy and important. Okay, this car came with those two washers or plates, so we're going to go right back with it. That's going to make life a lot easier. And here we are touching up and installing the deck lid hinges, installing the that little keeper there. And then here's just a cool shot of the articulation of that hinge and how it works. Here we go. Laying at a cut line. There's still a little bit of the old 1/4 panel remnant attached to the roof skin. So we are going to cut that off and eliminate it. That's out of the way. Okay, we are drilling out the resistance welds on the drip rail, and we have to push down the back of the drip rail. and there is a small piece that is broken off of the old quarter panel, and we need to get that out of the way. So we were able to grab it, and there it is. Okay, new quarter panels. We are punching holes for plug welding, and now we're prepping that out with some 220. Now, whenever we mate panels together, we always use a weld-through primer on the back side to sandwich that. We don't want to leave bare steel anywhere. We always use this. And final installation. I've had this quarter panel off and on multiple times fitting this thing, and this is the final time. And the last time it was removed, I have set multiple alignment holes with screws, so it should go back exactly where I wanted it to be on the last fitment. And after we check that, we're going to be on to the next process, which is welding. And here we're trying to do some really nice plug welds. If you do all of the work fitting and prepping, that makes the welding process go much, much better. Now they're really close to flush, but I'm going to take the extra step and knock off the very tops of these plug welds so we can make them really nice and flush with the panel. And you can see here I'm just being really accurate with the grinding wheel. We don't want to gouge the metal or scar it up really badly. Just use the right angle and make that thing flush. And feels good. We're ready for the next step, which is using a flap wheel. Now this is a 60 grit flap wheel, and it's going to leave a very nice finish. And you can start to see the little divots that were plug welds. And that's going to really mimic the factory resistance welds. So I'm really happy with that. And once it's primered, painted, sealed, it'll really replicate the factory finish. And here we are using some 80 grit, and then we'll switch over to 220 grit on this mini DA, and then Scotch-Brite before we prime. And we're just going to put a really light coat of primer just to hold it, keep it from rusting, keep any corrosion from starting. And there's a finished joint. Looks good. Things nice and straight. Plug welds turned out really well. And there it is, primed. Now before we paint the vehicle, there will be a little bit of sealant that is applied to this joint. And there's a shot of the driver's side finish out. And moving on to the bottom of the quarter panels. We're going to get those buttoned up. Now what you don't see is a jack underneath, and I'm pushing that into place with a piece of pine 2x4. And we're going to be securing that panel into place with vice grips. And we're not going to try to push this panel in just one spot. We're going to move the whole length of the panel so that we can get a really nice parallel fitment to this thing. And here, moving a little bit further back. And we're going to use vice grips to keep that set into place. And we want to use our vice grips as close as possible to the plug weld holes. Keep those panels really nice and tight while we plug weld those. And here's the final clamp. And we're ready to weld. And it's like I mentioned, if you do your fit up and your prep, that makes the welding process go so much smoother and you get a much nicer weld. And then you don't have to come back and use grinding wheels and really gouge out to grind down a big lump of weld. Now if this was just a collision job, yeah, I would just clean that up and leave the welds as are, or as is I should say. But we're going to be really nice and consistent throughout, even though it's the bottom of the car and it's never going to be seen. We're going to go ahead and knock off the very tops of the plug welds. Just do the same quality throughout the car, whether it's the bottom or the top, seen or not seen. Just repeating the process, flap wheels, 60 grit. We're going to get as high up close to the bottom of the quarter panel as possible. And we're not going for absolutely perfect. We want a little divot here because that's going to make it look like the factory. And you can see the little divot there where we had plug welded. And that's what you want to see. And we're just finishing that off with some 80, and then we're going to move to 220 Scotch-Brite. Apply just a little bit of primer there. Now this is the edge of the trunk pan, and we are punching more plug weld holes, and this is the leading edge of the bottom of the quarter, knocking off the EDP coat slightly. When you're welding, if there's any kind of paint, oil, grease, contaminant, you're not going to get a good weld, so that's why we're knocking that off slightly. And fitting the trunk extension. So now we know where everything needs to fall, and we're going to trim to fit and finish that, button that up and get it installed. Deburring it a little bit with the after we've cut it with the file. And 2 plug welds will hold this back piece. And we know exactly where it needs to be because we fitted it, clamped it into place. Now I'm going to set it with this screw and not weld it until I've reinstalled it, just to double check. and we're fishing that thing into place. Holding it up in place with a couple of magnets. And a clamp at the bottom. Okay, now this is the rear of the wheel well lip, and that is where the trunk extension is going to mate to the wheel well, and we're going to plug weld that also. Now the lines weren't exactly mating or parallel between the trunk extension and the trunk, so we're using the shrinker here to move that line by shrinking it. Now this is the driver's side. We've got that welded, finished out. I'm going to apply a little bit of primer. Never want to leave bare metal anywhere. And I like to use 3M Fast and Firm sealant. And we're going to seal this joint because we're going to have really limited access to this area once I've installed the lower valance. After all that's dried, we're going to come back and shoot a little bit of primer over it. Now this primer that I'm applying, it is a high build primer, sandable primer. I always want to make sure it's sandable. And there you can see the work that's been accomplished so far. Have a really nice fit on the trunk floor to trunk extension. And we're ready for the next step. Everything's primed, no bare metal. And at this point I have already fitted the lower valance and the quarter panel corner pieces. So I know exactly where the bottoms of the quarters need to be set. And we're going along plug welding. Everything's looking really nice. I always like to mark my holes out before I punch the plug weld holes so everything is nice and uniform, or equally spaced I should say. And there's the finished plug welds. You can see our lip is still really nice and straight. Plug welds are fairly evenly spaced. Now moving on to the wheel well lip. We've already done the prep work and just squeezing that into place. Welding process. And there's the finished plug welds. And you can see they're going to need minimum dressing. Let's knock the tops off to flush. And finish out with the flap wheel, just repeating the process. Picking one area, starting and finishing out. And that's the way I like to work. I really don't like to do a lot of work, like all of the welding and then come back, because that's the way things get missed, forgotten. Yeah, it's just much more efficient for me to do it this way. Finish one area, then move on. and get our clamp as close to the area to be welded as possible. We want those panels really nice and tight because we don't want moisture or road grime or dirt or anything like that getting sandwiched in between loose panels. Yeah, that'd be a good place for rust or issues to start. And the flap wheel. Flap wheel does such a nice job. .80 grit, and then 220. A little bit of Scotch Brite over the area. And there's what we have so far. And even though the wheel lip, there will be moldings installed, we're still going to finish it out nice. Yeah, really happy with that. Then we're going to install a little bit of primer to hold it until we get to the body working stage. You don't want any corrosion starting. As always, hey, thank you for watching.